Hey guys, Mrs. Fox here with part 3 of your Unit 7.3 Reconstruction, Rebuilding the Union, Flipped Classroom. We were just going to start Q6, the Civil Rights Act. All right, so remember when Lincoln was in office, he was a Republican, and you've got both radical and moderate Republicans. The moderate Republicans liked Lincoln's 10% plan. It was flexible. You know, it was something that the Democrats were going to be able to swallow. And then you, of course, had radical Republicans that wanted more extreme change, harsher punishments for the South. But whether you were a moderate or a radical Republican, you tended to agree with Freedmen's Bureau and, Reconstruction happening in the South and us needing to keep an eye on them, all these carpetbaggers coming down to the South, to keep an eye on the Southerners and make sure they're following the new rules. Okay, so a group of radical Republicans in Congress created a bill called the Civil Rights Act. And the Civil Rights Act declared that all persons born in the U.S., okay, if you're born in the U.S., you are a citizen. So skin color doesn't matter, right? You're a citizen if you're born here, and you're entitled to equal rights regardless of your race. This is something you guys have grown up in. You've grown up in a society where this is true. If you're born here, no matter your race or ethnic background or religious affiliation or anything, if you're born here, you are a U.S. citizen, and you should have equal rights under the law. Okay, this is a new act in the 1860s. They're trying to get passed that encompasses, multiple races. So it passes in Congress, the Civil Rights Act, but then it gets vetoed by Johnson, because remember, Johnson's not a Republican, especially friends with radical Republicans by any means. If Johnson has any Republican friends, they're going to be moderates, okay? Johnson is did I say Jackson before? If I did, I meant Johnson. So Johnson, he is a Democrat, and he vetoes the law when it lands on his desk, the Civil Rights Act bill. But Congress, which remember I told you guys before, is mostly Republican at this point. While Johnson's in office, most of Congress is made up of Republican people. They override his veto, and the Civil Rights Act does in fact pass and become law because they overrid his veto in 1866. However, okay, they saw that not everybody's on board with this, right? Democrats are not on board. Even some of the moderate Republicans are maybe not on board. Johnson is not on board. The South, at least all the racist people in the South, are not on board with the Civil Rights Act. And so they're concerned that there could be backlash, or there could be loopholes, or there could be something to try to stop this going. So they're going to take action about that. And we're going to look at that on the next slide. Okay, there's that group of radical Republicans for you guys that get that act, that bill written and passed into an act in the picture on the bottom there. Okay, so think about the fact that they're worried, like, okay, it passed, but there's a lot of people not happy about this. What should we do? Okay, draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page, and give yourself a left-hand side question if you didn't. Here we go. What they do is, we don't want any doubt that what we said in the Civil Rights Act is in fact true, that any U.S. born person is a citizen and has equal rights. So we're going to do the biggest change, the most concrete, obvious law that our land has, and those are amendments, right? This is a change to our U.S. Constitution. Remember, we've studied the U.S. Constitution back in Unit 3, guys. The first 10 amendments of the Constitution were the Bill of Rights, like freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and, a whole bunch of different ones that we talked about, freedom to own guns, all these different things, okay? So since then, we had 11, we had 12. Remember, 13 is slavery ends, right? That there's no more slavery in the United States of America. And now Congress has decided, hey, the Civil Rights Act is not crystal clear enough. We want to make sure there is no doubt President Johnson, no doubt haters in the South, no doubt Democrats, that this is a thing. And so we're going to get past the 14th Amendment. And what the 14th Amendment does is say pretty much the same thing the Civil Rights Act did. Hey, all people born in the U.S. are citizens, and they have the same rights and the same protection of the law as any other citizen. Okay, so what this does is it gives African Americans full citizenship. Other things that it does that are important, guys, is this turns over the Dred Scott case. Remember when we talked about Dred Scott? He lost his case. He did not gain his freedom because at that time, the Supreme Court said, no, sir, you are property. You do not have the right to sue in the U.S. court system because we do not consider you an equal or a citizen, Mr. Scott. And so now Dred Scott, that case is overturned. Okay, the 3/5 compromise back from first semester, guys, that African Americans are only going to count as 3/5 of a person. That is overturned. Okay, this is law-changing legislation that is still used today for different ethnic groups and religious groups and stuff, trying to seek the same rights and equal protection under the law. Okay, so the 14th Amendment, one of the most important amendments that we have in the United States of America. If you're born here, you have the same rights and same protection of the laws as anybody else, all citizens, okay? So that's the 14th Amendment. And they had consequences if you were going to ignore this amendment. So for example, if you were a southern state that were still denying males the right to vote or somehow denying them equal rights, then you could be punished by having people in your Congress reduced. Remember how many House of Representatives members you get is based off of your population, right? And then the Senate is 2 senators per state. Well, we might take some of those people away from you if you're not minding your P's and Q's, if you're not following the rules, okay? Another thing the 14th Amendment did in this like fine print of this stuff that got passed was, hey, if you supported the Confederacy, if you committed treason and left us to form the Confederate States of America, and now you're back in power somehow, because remember, Lincoln had fired all those people when they came back, but then Johnson let them back in. Now it's like, yeah, no, you're not eligible to hold office. You committed treason. You can't hold an office of power anymore, which makes total sense, right? So it also kicks all those people out of power, making Johnson furious, right? Because he had gotten them back into power. And so, of course, President Johnson and most of the Confederate population was not happy about the 14th Amendment. But, you know, hey, good for us that we're on the right side of history. This is super important amendment. All right. Give yourself a left-hand side question. Underline everything you just wrote all the way across your page. Of course, there's video clips. Check those out, guys. Okay. All right. So then radical Republicans take charge of Congress during the midterm elections. So, hey, yeah, we had a, nice, healthy Republican population in Congress, but now within that Republican population in Congress, halfway through Johnson's presidency, it's not just Republicans, it is actually radical Republicans, okay? So the most extreme of the extreme, because during the first half of Johnson's presidency, I actually even spoke in the last video, you guys, the Democratic Party had majority, but you had stronger voices in the Republican Party for the first half of Johnson's presidency. And then some of those House of Representative elections and some of the Senate elections happened halfway through a president's 4-year term. And so in 1866, halfway through Johnson's term, there's an election for some of the Congress seats, okay? And at that point, more Republicans win, and a lot of those Republicans are radical. So now we've got the radical Republicans in charge of Congress. And what's going to happen from now until the end of Reconstruction really is Johnson's going to lose more and more of his power to control Reconstruction ideas and laws and what's going to happen. And Congress is going to take over more and more responsibilities about budgets for Reconstruction, what Reconstruction entails, how states are going to come back into the Union, all that sort of thing. Okay, so they are now taking charge. So Republicans, not Johnson, are going to have more say in what's happening during Reconstruction. Okay, so in 67, they passed the Military Reconstruction Act. And what they say is, hey, we're going to divide the Southern territory that had left us to go be the Confederacy into 5 districts. And each district is going to have a U.S. military presence, even more heavy than it was before. And those districts along the South are going to be controlled by those federal troops, making sure that Southerners are allowing the Freedmen's Bureau to do their job, following the 13th Amendment and not practicing slavery, and now practicing the 14th Amendment too, and giving African Americans their equal rights and protection under the law. So this period of time, sometimes they hash it out into a separate section of Reconstruction, and it's called the Military Reconstruction period, because the military, is down there in charge of a lot of things happening in the South. So they also come up with the Reconstruction Acts of 1867, which is the title of this slide. This is the big one, okay? What the Reconstruction Acts of 67 are is, hey, here's the process you have to go through before you can come back into the Union, okay? So here's the steps they finally agreed on, and they pass into law. Any Confederate state that had left and joined the Confederacy, if you want to come back legally and legally be part of the United States of America again, here's what you need to do. 1, you need to form a new state constitution, because you had ditched the one you had and made a new one while you were a Confederate state. Okay, that's not going to work. You got to ditch that one now and recreate a United States of America state constitution. Every state has a state constitution that they follow even today. And so you've got to have a new one, and in that new one you're writing, it better say that all adult men, because remember, women can't vote yet, so just men can vote, including African Americans. Okay, and you better ratify the 14th Amendment, because remember, each state has to accept or ratify or change, right, that on their constitution that they're accepting this amendment. So before you're allowed to rejoin the United States of America, you need to make sure that you're letting all African American men vote and that you're ratifying the 14th Amendment. Okay, so these are steps to come back into the Union. All right, by 1870, okay, 5 years after the war, by 1870, during the Reconstruction era, all the Southern states had approved constitutions and were let back into the Union. So it took about 5 years after the war was done, after all the fighting had finished, of this Reconstruction period, to get all the states down south to come back into the United States of America. Just because that happens does not mean Reconstruction ends. So even though they're all back in by 1870, there's still a lot of writing, there's still a lot of, abuse of the laws, there's still a lot of fixing that needs to be done, and Reconstruction is going to last another 7 years after all of them come into the Union again. Okay, draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page. Some video clips for you, check those out. Johnson is impeached. Okay, we haven't talked about impeachment in a long time because so far it hadn't actually happened yet. Johnson is going to be the first of 3 presidents to date that have been impeached in the United States of America. Remember, being impeached does not actually mean you are fired. It means that charges are brought up against you and you're going to have a trial to determine whether or not you should be fired. So you possibly could be fired if you're impeached, but you don't necessarily actually get fired. It depends on what happens at your trial and whether or not you're found guilty. So 3 presidents in U.S. history have been impeached. Johnson is the first one, okay, in 1867. Way later in history, Bill Clinton, he was also impeached in 1998, and Donald Trump was impeached in 2019. All 3 times, those 3 guys that were impeached, none of them were found guilty of their crime, and so nobody's actually been fired through the impeachment process in U.S. history yet. Okay, so Johnson gets impeached. They're trying to fire him, but he's not going to get fired. Well, what happened? Why are they trying to impeach him? What's up with that? Okay, we're going to get into that when we get to the next part. So I'll see you for the next part. When you're ready, come join me.